Hello, Sichach here from my Life in Poetry podcast. It's been a long time. I'm busy working on episode 5, currently with the working title My Life in Poetry and the System Antics of Suicide. But today I have something different for you. Last year, I was featured by Africa Uncensored in their X, now Twitter, space in a discussion on the rising cases of suicide in Kenya. A lot of consequential topics were discussed by various professionals, and I thought this would add context to the mental health conversation. I'm not going to run any ads or monetize this episode, and this is because I'm borrowing the episode from Africa Uncensored, who I think they are brilliant. They're doing some great work. If you have a minute, check them out on Twitter at Africa Uncensored. Also, if you are yet to follow my Life in Poetry podcast, please follow so that you don't miss the upcoming episode, which will be dropping the first week of April. Thank you and enjoy.
Join our newsroom, a Twitter space by Africa Uncensored. My name is Linda Ngari, and today we are going to just look into the rising cases of suicide or maybe perceived suicide, because lately there's been murder cases trending or going on in the country, but what is perceived is that, or rather what would be reported is that it was suicide. So just that's also part of this conversation. What are the implications of murders being possibly perceived as suicide? What does that do to, people who have such ideations of suicide? What is the state of our mental health as a country? And generally, what can be done better in regards to mental health within the nation, or how we perceive and receive news such as suicide? There's lately a video by Eric Omondi, who apparently posed to threaten that he'll commit suicide because of the state of the economy. So what are the implications of such things? Because in the comment section, people have some very strong opinions about it. Some are saying, go ahead and do it. But how do we perceive such things as a nation? And what can be done better? And what are the implications of the status that we're at currently? Tracy, I hope we have you back. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now? You still cannot hear me?
So some of our speakers already here include Joan Bataru, who is a host for the podcast Creative Captive podcast, which talks about mental health. We have mental health advocate Sichach Moses, as well as psychologist Marianne. So, guys, I'd like you to just introduce yourselves briefly before we can get into the conversation. Starting with you, Marianne. Karibu.
Asante sana. I hope you guys can hear me. Maybe you can confirm if I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, guys. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you for the invite, and I'm really glad to begin this session. I am Mariana Akinyi. I am a medical psychologist by profession. I am also a psychological first aid trainer with Aviva Mental Health Services, and I'm really passionate about mental health, giving care, advocacy. It's a really great passion of mine, and I'm glad to be here. I hope this session will be enlightening, and I'm open to discussion, to interacting, and let's make it fun. Let's learn, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Joanne?
Hear me? My name is Joan Bataru. I do many things, but in this capacity, I am a host and producer of the Creative Captive podcast, where I talk about being a creative and, everything about being a creative, as well as I dabble in mental health as well. This is from a point of personal experience as well. So I'm really excited to have this discussion and have this space. And I really look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Tracy, I hope we finally have you before we go to Sichach. Can you?
I hope so. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Sichach, please go ahead.
Oh,
Sichach,
I'm
if
so
you're
sorry.
speaking. Okay.
I'm so sorry. My name is Moses Sichach, and Linda has introduced me as a mental health advocate. I think I am. I've never introduced myself as such. However, I am also a podcast host. I have a podcast. It's called My Life in Poetry, and I wanted to start this podcast to push the Overton wind on the conversations about mental health while also educating people in depth about it. I am also speaking from it's made in a first person point of view. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but as someone who has experienced it and gone to multiple psychiatrists, I thought it will be very important to be able to communicate mental health in a way that serves people who are suffering with mental health, and while also explaining to people what exactly they can do when they have someone suffering from mental health within their midst. Yeah. So I think that's who I am. I hope to be able to contribute and educate and inspire people on this space. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Sichach. So to just get it started, Marianne, what do you think is the perception of such a heavy topic as suicide in Kenya?
First, I'd like to say that we are a country that is mostly traditional or leaning more on the religious side. And it's really taken a while for us to accept or, to wrap our minds around issues of mental health. And that's why there's still so much stigma around mental health issues, around suicide. In some places, you can't even mention the word suicide and have a listening ear. So it's still taking some time to get used to, but I'm really happy about the new generation that is really open to this. You find that so many young people are open to learning about themselves, knowing what is going on in their lives. You find really young people, the Gen Zs, yeah, they know so much about mental health. They are so in touch with what is going on in their lives, their past traumas, such things, and it's really encouraging because you find that with the older generation, it's a topic that is really shunned upon. It's something that's not talked about as much. It is perceived as demonic things or supernatural in nature. But I'm happy to a certain point that we're taking up this topic. It's becoming more talked about. This platform in itself is a way to break that stigma, to let people learn. More people are becoming more aware, and it's a direction I'm hoping we can move in fast and together collectively, so that mental health awareness is not just a topic that is talked about in hushed tones or in small groups. It should be something that is talked about more often, more openly, and hopefully with time it's a direction we can move in together so that people can get the help they actually need. So we're still a long way from being more open about this, but also it's encouraging the direction we are moving towards.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important point about how the younger generation is perceiving mental health or taking care of their mental health as opposed to the older generation. I guess this is your cue, Joanne, maybe from your podcast or just from personal experience, how differently are, the younger people perceiving mental health and everything around it. as opposed to the older generation? And do we seem to agree with the different generations, or I don't know, have we drifted so far away?
I don't think we've drifted so far. That is based on perception. With mental health and even suicide, I think because people don't understand it, people fear things they don't understand, and it's easier to push something away. In regards to the generational gap, I'd say from personal experience, I struggled with my mental health in 2019, 2020, and it was really difficult at the time because I was also getting some therapy and help with that. But it was really difficult because, again, I'd internalized that I don't want my parents finding out that I'm getting help, because I don't know how they react. Of course, I knew how they'd react. I assumed they'd push back, or they'd treat me like this fragile porcelain doll who could break easily. And that's the internalized perception. But through my therapy and this open discussions that I've had with my mother, for example, you get to learn that we're all human beings. We all have struggles. And I think we really need to have open discussions and allow, like what Marianne has said, let's not talk about it in harsh tones. And in this case, I think in Kenya, it's like, let's not even talk about it honestly when it comes to mental health. But when given the opportunity to talk about mental health, I think the older generation is open. But I also think that's a personal choice, because the discussions with my mother, I thought she'd be very closed off about it, because in initial conversations, and I think this is very natural, when parents would take the defensive side, especially if you're mentioning childhood trauma, you're like, remember this thing you did this day? For them, it was probably just normal Tuesday, but it maybe impacted you really deeply. But even with the initial maybe pushback, it's less about them not wanting to talk about it, but maybe the initial discomfort. So on my end, it's been positive because we've had really interesting conversations with my mother, to the extent where I think because again, dealing with your mental health sometimes is really personal, and you really need to have that space on your own with maybe a therapist or with someone you trust before you can now be open. And with benefits of getting help from professionals is that not only do you change your perception, but other people notice. And I think it's from that noticing, my mom noticed that I'm changing how I'd react, like shifting from a point where she'd say something, I'd be reactionary. I don't react. I listen, or I counter with a question of where is this coming from? And also from my own personal understanding that whatever has been said, although it's a trigger, there's more to it, and you can easily dig that down with conversation. So I really think that is largely just an assumption and a bias we are carrying with us, that it's only this younger generation, Gen Z, who are more open to it. I really think in general, we need to have more open discussions and to normalize talking about mental health, because truthfully, the older generations, although they don't talk about it, they're definitely struggling with mental health. And I think Marianne maybe will go into details of maybe causes or more, from her professional side about mental health. And you'll realize we all have brains, they all work weirdly. And that's all connected also to the things we say and how we relate with others. So really, it's just opening the conversation, not creating boundaries or gatekeeping and saying it's only these young people who have the capacity to understand the emotions, but it's actually, we are all able, regardless of age, to openly discuss health matters.
Thank you very much, Joanne. The next question, I'd like to pose it back to Marianne. So Marianne, Linda initially talked about, how people talk about this on the internet, and they threaten that they're going to take their lives, and people encourage them. People think it's a joke. People think this is another case of the boy who cried wolf. But what are the telltale signs of a person harboring suicidal thoughts?
Yeah. I think many people, for any topic that is brought up, there will always be people with different opinions. There's some people who be empathetic towards someone who is, having suicidal tendencies. There's someone who will have pushback. There's someone who will even encourage some people. And it obviously, it stems from people's different views of, events in their lives. How do they perceive things? And everyone's different. Everyone has had different events in their lives. Everyone sees things differently. Everyone has gone through things, and it makes us turn out very differently with different reactions to things. And it's really sad that sometimes you just, scrolling on the internet, and then you see someone, as you said, someone may be threatening to take their lives or to die by suicide. And the comments are so horrific. Sometimes you wonder and you get really angry. Sometimes you even get really triggered. But then you just have to maybe take a step back and think of it in the perspective that people are different. What you know is probably not what the next person knows. How you think about something is not the same way the next person does. And sometimes you just have to, realize that there's nothing you can do, but you can maybe filter how you react, or you can, um, check the way you react to some things. But I think it's a really long conversation on how people, perceive different things. But maybe to answer on the telltale signs, and it's I usually hear this a lot, that when someone was found that they had died by suicide, someone says, but they seem so happy. Mbona alijua? You hear those conversations. Like sometimes people say it's so unexpected because this person showed, apparently, didn't show any signs. But we sometimes forget that um, mental health issues, unlike a physical problem, or unlike a physical disease or a physical ailment, it's not like a broken leg that you can just see, oh, his leg is broken, he's in a cast, or he has crutches, he's sick. Yeah. With mental health issues, it's really subjective. And sometimes the warning signs can, virtually not be there at all. But sometimes there are these really, really subtle signs that if no matter, you can even be, you can be not close to this person, but you can just tell. Because with mental health issues, sometimes it progresses over a very long period of time, and depending on how you knew someone, you could maybe pick a few things. Some things change over time. And some of the most common or the most physical things you might have noticed is maybe um, things like maybe their eating patterns, their sleeping patterns. Maybe someone has, lost weight over a very short period of time, or they have gained it, or maybe their eating patterns have changed, or you just notice their mood has changed over a period of time. Maybe they were this really jolly person, and then it just goes down slowly, or you feel someone is isolating more than usual, you know, or how they react to things. Maybe they become really irritable, and something really small sparks them off very fast. These are like some signs. You might just like wave them away, like, he's just maybe having a bad day. And sometimes, yes, maybe someone is just having a bad day. But if you're close to this person, or if it's someone you've known for a while, these really subtle things can be a greater mirror to what is going on in their lives. And the thing about maybe someone being suicidal is that they might not want to talk about it. But if you notice these things, you might want to, breach the subject, or sometimes just let them know. I've noticed you haven't been yourself lately. Is everything fine? Don't even have to like bring up a whole, big situation. Just ask them. I've noticed maybe you look more tired than usual. Sometimes just a statement like that could, prompt them to say something. And if they don't, it's okay. You can ask them another time, or you just leave it at that. And sometimes you find that there is something that has been noticed, that towards the end of someone maybe of planning, when someone plans the a way to take their lives, you might find that towards the end they seem more cheerful than usual, or they start giving away things. They start, uh being so sorry. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. So, towards the end, you might find people giving away some things or making plans as if, they just pop from their moods become like really labile, or they go from being really low to being really high. There are fluctuations in their mood, in the way they talk to people. So it's not like a one-step thing where you just see something and it clicks, this person is suicidal. No, it can be really, really, really subtle, and sometimes it takes a long while for you to see that, and sometimes you might not even see it. Sometimes you find that some people who are closest to someone never really saw those signs, because it's not that mentally unhealthy people, it's not easy to see, and sometimes people go to great lengths to try and hide it, because as I've said, with all the stigma attached to it, or maybe feeling like they might not have a good way of talking about it, because it's not an easy conversation to begin. I can't just approach a friend and say, hey, I've not been feeling like myself lately. It's hard sometimes to start that conversation, and it might be so bothersome that they find that it's not worth talking about, because mental health issues, they change the way you think, the way you perceive things, the way you feel, the way you view the world around you, the way you view yourself, to a point that you might find that you feel so isolated, so torn from everyone else, that even talking about something that would seem so normal, you'd be like, but he didn't tell me anything. If he was suffering, why didn't he say anything? You forget that it's not because they don't want to, they don't know how to, because mental health issues can really isolate a person. It changes how you view yourself, how you view your relationships, how you view the world at large. And it can become such a small box that you have to fit yourself in, and you find it so hard to get out of. So in as much as sometimes the signs can be there, remember that sometimes you might not see it at all, and it might come as such a big surprise, and you find yourself in, if you have maybe encountered, if you have someone close to you, or you know someone who might have taken their life, you might find yourself asking yourself questions, but I didn't see it. And it's really hard to answer those questions, because there's no one simple answer. Sometimes the signs are there, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it depends on how close you are to this person, how open they were with you. They might have, led subtle hints. Sometimes someone even mentions it in passing, in jokingly too. You find someone saying, ah, nimechoka na hii maisha, and you might think it's funny because maybe they're saying it in a very light way, but sometimes they might even like drop such hints. They might be saying it in actual words, but you don't take it seriously because there's no other sign backing it up, So it's a collection of so many signs, but if a number of these happen, at once, or in close succession, or in one person, you might start questioning, is my friend okay? Is this person really, faring on well? Is it something, a subject I want to breach with them, or should I tell someone to get in touch with them? So it's not a straightforward answer, but these are some of the signs you might see, or you might notice in someone you know, or someone you've interacted with.
Thanks, Marianne, especially for putting it in such a perspective. I'd like to also acknowledge two speakers who've just joined: Faith Mwango, a psychologist, and Harriet Torimu, a mental health advocate. So going on to what is currently going on in Kenya, and cases of murder that some people claim are covered up as suicide and have been reported as suicide, like the Jeff and DJ Fatso case, as well as the lady in Kasarani. So I just want to know, what does that do? This goes to you, Sichach, and maybe later, Faith, you can come in to answer. What does that do to someone who's been through a mental health crisis, or even people who are prone to such ideations? This is a question that was asked by Sitawa, who's among the listeners. So she wanted to know, what does this have in terms of affecting people who may actually have suicidal thoughts, when these words are randomly thrown around when there's a murder case or there's not conclusive evidence. I don't know if it's done to cover things up. Like, what does that actually do to people who have such ideations, Sichach?
Okay, thank you, Linda. So I think we have to understand that bad mental health cases are subjective experiences that play out objectively to a society. So when things such as unsolved murder cases are brushed off as suicide without actual proof of suicide, and it is dangerous for people who actually are suicidal, because a lot of times when you just browse the internet, and I think the internet has turned the mental health thing so loud, the volume of the mental health issue so loud, because if you follow mental health spaces, all the things you see are about mental health. And when you go to the internet, people are crying for help online, and maybe it's the only way they can get help. I understand also when you go to the comment section, it's quite heartbreaking. And I think it is a problem because it immediately marks you as an easy suicide case. So when someone has something against you, it may mark you as an easy murder because it will be swept off as suicide. Also, we have to understand this is coming from a point of having a culture that loves punishment. Yeah. So when we are young, the people who are punished are the people who behave differently so that you can behave similar to everyone else. And when we become grown up and someone is suffering from bad mental health, they tend to behave differently. And we tend to punish these people as a society. And it's also codified in our penal code. It's penal code 226. The one on suicide is illegal. And it raises a lot of questions. How can suicide be illegal? But it's because we have grown in a culture of punishment. And being in a culture of punishment means that when a murder is said as suicide, it's almost like it's okay. We've been socially programmed to accept suicide as a mistake. Yet there is another way which, as a society, we can be able to solve this is by trying to. It's not punishment per se, but more of a reformation type of situation. When someone is suicidal, why don't we turn this penal code to force this person for mandatory counseling or mandatory help instead of criminalizing it? I know there's a case in Nakuru, but it was a couple of years ago, or maybe even more, where this guy jumped from this 5th floor of the building, and after they survived, they were later charged a fine of 200,000 Kenya shillings for attempting suicide. I think it's absurd. I think maybe we should do something about causing a culture shift towards something more accepting, and then it will be harder for people to pin suicide cases, to pin murder cases on suicide, because the society itself does not view this as something wrong. I think those are my thoughts. I don't know if I was clear, but I can clarify later if need be.
Yeah, I think you are very clear. It's more of a society issue and how we approach suicide. Faith, I don't know if you can come in to answer the same question. What is the implication of having murder cases covered up as suicide, or just inconclusive deaths quickly reported as suicide?
Thank you very much, Linda. I'd like to first comment and say that the rise in suicide cases in Kenya is a concerning trend that requires urgent attention from both the government and the society at large. Suicide is a complex issue that can have multiple contributing factors. This could be mental health challenges, social and economic factors, and even individual circumstances. It is essential to address the root cause of suicide to prevent more people from taking their own lives. Covering up murders as suicide is not only illegal, but I think is also harmful to the victims' families, their friends who are left without answers or justice. I think this trend can also have a significant impact on people struggling with their mental health, who may feel more hopeless and helpless in a society where they cannot trust the justice system to provide them with the protection that they need. Moreover, it can perpetuate a culture of silence around mental health challenges and suicide, preventing people from seeking help when they need it the most. I think it's crucial to have a robust mental health support system that can provide assistance to individuals struggling with their mental health and prevent them from resorting to suicidal ideation or even suicidal attempts. This support can include things like counseling, therapy, or even other evidence-based interventions that can help individuals cope with their challenges and build resilience. It's also very essential to raise awareness about mental health issues and suicide prevention in communities and schools even, for us to be able to reduce the stigma and increase help-seeking behaviors for anyone struggling with self-harm or suicidal ideation. All I'd like to say in conclusion is that addressing the rise in suicide cases in Kenya requires a very comprehensive approach that involves addressing the root causes of suicide, providing support to the individuals struggling with mental health challenges, and increasing awareness about mental health issues and suicide prevention. Covering up murders as suicide, like I said, it's not only illegal, but very harmful to the victims' families and friends, and can definitely perpetuate a culture of silence around mental health challenges and suicide. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Marianne, do you have anything to add on to that? I'd like to also invite any listener. You can request the mic to chime into the conversation. If you have anything, just request the mic and we'd let you in as a speaker. Thank you.
No, I think they've covered quite a lot. If I continue commenting, I think I'll just be repeating their comments, their sentiments, yeah.
Joanne?
Yeah, I agree with what has been said in regards to it being really unfair to the families, especially who are the victims' families. Some would maybe create conspiracy theories that, the police are like, they don't look into it, or maybe they don't have the right skills in terms of identifying what the difference between an actual murder and whether it was suicide. Because what I understood from this question was it's a murder, especially in that case with DJ Fatso, that witnesses are claiming, this is what it looked like. The manner in which this person or the deceased was found, suspicious. The events leading up to it, suspicious as well. So it's sad to see that this entire scenario really makes it difficult. And even in what Sichach had said regarding penalizing people who are struggling in their mental health. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. So according to data from Chiromo Hospital, 311 people die by suicide annually, 77 of them women, while 240 are men. And Central Kenya leads with 5 deaths daily. So I'd pose a question to Wairimo, Miriam, Faith, in that order. How do the rates of suicide or attempted suicide differ among different groups in society, whether based on gender, age, or other factors? So we'll start with Faith. Faith, if you can hear me. Okay, Marianne.
Thank you for that.
All right.
Yes? I'm audible,
No, it's
yeah?
fine. Go ahead. Yeah, you're audible. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we've seen that some of the causes of, suicide, I think it's important to mention that suicide is usually an end result of, suffering from some mental health challenge. It could be a disorder such as, depression, or, some other mental health issues, maybe schizophrenia, some episodes of mania, something usually leads up to suicide. So suicide is not just a lone factor. It is precipitated by other things. So you find that some things that might push someone, or some might precipitate a person wanting to, or having suicidal ideations, or actually, coming into committing the act, or actually taking their life, is issues such as substance use, or pre-existing mental health conditions. There could be even family issues, or just interpersonal difficulties. Maybe they're having problems with their relationships, their friends, they don't relate that well with others. Some issues of maybe, economic factors might even play a part in it. Currently, we all understand that the economic, situation in Kenya is not that good. There are so many cases of, or issues of, unemployment. So many youth are not employed. This, of course, causes stress, causes, undue pressure on people, and you find that more often you find that people are having, more negative thoughts, more negative feelings. It even affects maybe their self-esteem, how they view themselves. Some people even reach to a point where maybe they feel like a failure. They feel that there's no other way out. Such issues just generally in life could precipitate or lead someone to reach such a point. And so in terms of maybe I'd mention the gender difference. You've mentioned that there are more completed suicides among men than women. An interesting factor maybe we could look at is that there are actually more women who attempt suicide than men, but you find that more men actually die by suicide. And this comes down to issues such as more women are more, emotionally reactive. You find that more women could be like on a higher, how do I put this? More women could be could have more precipitating factors like issues such as depression, social hardships. They are more affected emotionally, so they might they do commit suicide, do attempt suicide more often. But then you find that the means they use are, for lack of a better term, mild. So you find that maybe ingesting poison, or such instances where it allows for time for someone to find them and save them. But then when it comes to men, few of them attempt suicide, but the means they use are more lethal. Let's say access to such something as firearms. I mean, for such lethal means, you find that the rate of them actually dying by suicide, are higher. So you find that more women could report to have more emotional difficulties. More women will attempt suicide, but because maybe of the presence of social support, how more connected females are, they have more social networks. They might find support that enables them to maybe not reach a point where, or they might have access to milder means of trying to commit suicide. But for men, with a tendency to be more, socially isolated, there isn't enough, or the quality of their social connections are not as, effective as women. And you find that the methods that mostly men use to try and commit suicide are more lethal. So they end up actually completing their suicide. So that is one of the factors that bring in the difference between the rates between men and women. And I think that's it. If there's something else I've missed, kindly. Linda?
No, I can hear you. It's okay.
Okay.
Wairimo, I'd like to bring you in. Wairimo Harriet, if you can hear us.
Hi, Bonareri. Thank you very much. To add to what was it, Marianne, or okay? To add to what she was saying, I think the biggest challenge is that according to the African society in general, men are held to be more, let's say, something like hardcore. They're not supposed to like express their emotions, their feelings, like whatever they're battling, they're not like supposed to put it out there. So you find that they suppress instead of like speak out on what is eating them up inside compared to women. So that's why I think you find that it's very likely for men to go ahead and commit suicide compared to women. Because, naturally, as females, we don't know how to bottle up stuff. Normally, we just speak it out, either to our friends or to maybe even our mothers, just for them to listen to us and what we have that's basically bugging us inside. So like she said, we kind of have the upper hand when it comes to dealing with stuff, because we have a really strong support system, and we are known to be emotionally vulnerable people and expressive of what we have that's not going on well, whether it's going on good. Like we tend to speak a lot about it, but you find that for men it's very hard, because once you start speaking about your emotions or the challenges you're facing in life, you're then termed to be a weak man, or in other words, like you find that men are told to be, yani in Kiswahili unafaa kukaa ngumu, which I think is rather a very misleading notion, because we are all human, we are all bound to break at some point. And for me, I believe it's not bad for them to express themselves, because in as much as they're supposed to be manly and all that, we also don't want the suicide cases as in rising day in, day out. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank
Sorry, Tracy. Indeed, men and women have different dynamics, but I'd like to throw it out there in case anyone would like to comment on, say, people in the queer community and how mental health affects them, which is known to affect them pretty much at a higher rate than, the normal men-women dynamics. But I'd like to just bring you in, Sichach, as the only man in the panel, to comment on the statistics of, men having to be more prone to completing suicide, as Marianne has mentioned, as opposed to women. What's your take on that?
Okay, thank you, Linda. I hope I'm clear. So for me,
Yes, you are.
when I've heard what Wairimo has said, yeah, and I think to some extent, as a man, I disagree, because I think the approach that the issues of suicide take, or issues of therapy takes, when dealing with men and women, fail to identify the major differences in what I can say personality dispositions. Because when you say, I think there's a research, I can't quite remember the research specifically, but I can fact check for you later and send you the research. You can share it. They found out that men respond more to therapy that leads to action rather than therapy that needs them to talk, because I don't think it's a social construct. I think we have deeply embedded biological differences between men and women that later play themselves as social constructs. So I don't know what the doctors on the panel have to think about this, but I think the approach itself is first difficult for men to be able to accept, or to, the approach itself does not work for men, That is the reason why men have a higher success rate. I think men kill themselves and women commit suicide because, as it was mentioned earlier, women pick things that give space for survival. But I think when a man chooses to kill themselves, it's usually violent.
Bro, wait. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello, I'm
What do
here.
you think? What is the main reason for committing suicide in Kenya? I'm from India. I don't know what the reason
Hi,
behind that.
the talent introvert. Your mic is on. Please mute
I'm from
yourself.
India. I don't know what is the reason for increasing cases of suicide in Kenya. Can you explain that?
Okay. You've directed the question to me.
Sorry, teacher. Sorry. Please proceed.
Wait,
Okay.
I couldn't get you. What?
So you directed the question to me. Why?
Yeah. Direct the question.
Okay. So I think
Yes, have you finished?
I think the reason that there are rising cases of suicide in Kenya has to do with direct. I think if we do research on this, we'll find a direct correlation between the levels of suicide and the levels of economic difficulty in the country. It's hard to, you see, I'm not saying that causes of mental health. I'm not talking about causes of mental health per se. I'm just talking about stressors that aggravate mental health. So when you are in
Wait.
position,
I think there is not any enough employment for people out there in Kenya, right? That is the reason.
yes, I'm saying something like there's no employment, there are no social amenities to deal with this, because when you see, we act like it's normal for, and I think this is because of growing up Kenyan. It's normal for things to be difficult. I think this is a Kenyan problem. Or it's normal for some people to have all the wealth and other people to have nothing. But I don't think this is the case. I think it's something very wrong with how we approach things, and we end up exposing the most vulnerable people to no choices. So when someone is already predisposed towards suicidal ideation, because suicide does not just arise from social reasons. There are also people who are biologically or genetically inclined towards it. If your family has a history of mental health problems, you are probably going to have a mental health problem, because it has to do with the levels of hormones in your body and how you react to stress or neuroticism, for that matter. So when we do that, this as a country, we expose the most vulnerable people to factors that will aggravate this, and hence the rising cases of suicide in the country. I think that is the reason. I think maybe someone more qualified as a doctor may also answer on that.
I'd like to
Uh,
take a
Go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me? I'm hearing two voices. Sorry. Can you hear
Now
me?
we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
I'd like to simply put this based on my personal experience with suicidal cases. In Kenya, there's so many complicated or complex multifactorial reasons. There's so many. As my colleague here has said, we have social factors, we have economic, we have cultural factors that contribute to the problem. And then some of these factors, if we narrow them down, we're looking at poverty, we're looking at unemployment, we're looking at relationship issues, substance abuse, mental health challenges. All forms of life stressors can lead to someone developing self-harm. And especially the stigma, since we're talking about suicide, the stigma that surrounds mental health and suicide in Kenya especially prevents individuals from seeking help and support when they need it, which further makes the problem even worse. So it wouldn't be fair to say that in Kenya the only cause that leads to suicidal ideations or attempts is unemployment. a lot of things that happen within Kenya and within the world can highly contribute to someone developing suicidal ideations, especially if their resilience is tested to a certain extent that has not been developed by them over the years. So in order to, deal with this suicidal cases and things like that, it's important to address all the underlying issue, not to just pick one and go with it, because it promotes people to be more open and supportive, and especially for the people who have gone through it, they can come outward and say help, so hence help us reduce the risk of suicide, improving their mental health outcomes for everybody. Yeah.
Hello. Actually, I don't think that it is not based upon the dress and things like that. It is totally based upon their mental health, like that.
All right, thank you very much. The talent and Faith. At this point, I'd like to invite Engineer Mark Masai to speak. Mark, if you can hear us.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that motion. I would like to contribute for a few things there. Because the rise of suicide in Kenya has been so much rampant. Can you allow me to speak in Swahili?
Yeah, go ahead. There's no problem.
Okay, cause unajua maboys kama si maboys tunakwanga na shida moja. Unapata boy anaenda anaambia bishta yake, manzee, mi kuna issue na hii mara maadhi mara nini. Mi naona kama nataka kujitoa uhai, alafu unasikia mshaa anakuambia manzee, hautakuwa wa kwanza. Wewe fanya tu hivyo jimaade wewe uende. Then mostly unaweza pata ina vitu zina contribute maboys kujiua, inakwanga relationship na economic unemployment na peer pressure. Mostly inakwanga peer pressure because hao wase gang yenye uko nayo wanatumia madawa, gang yenye uko nao wanafanyia kila kitu. So unapata mzee hata anaingizwa kwa kwenda kuiba, anasema hata nikikufa haidhuru. So unapata it is better as the social media kuadvocate hii kitu. Akiona msee ana nini, akiona msee amepost kitu kama anataka kujiua, somebody from somewhere aende tu encourage. You can save a life actually by encouraging that person. Hata umdanganya tu, mwambie manze, mimi nitakuja, wewe kama tukutane, wewe nitakujenga kazi, instead ya kumwambia wewe jiwe. Unajua mostly mtu akipostio kitu alafu aone ma comments anaonanga kama society haimpendi, then you find that say instead ya kuenda kufanya kitu kingine, wacha complete mission yake. But as a society wenye tumeingia kwa social media, we have internet and we have all sort of the things, we can actually saidia sana pali penye mtu anaweza jieza kuliko kuacha tu mtu akufe, because ukiluzu mtu leo haujui ni wangapi wamefuata mikondo ya huyu mtu, haujui ni wangapi wako karibu na yeye watafanya hivyo the same. Then we will end up having a society of suicidal, everybody atakuwa suicidal. So that's all for me, and thanks very much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Engineer.
very much.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Linda.
From Engineer's point about the impact of social media in suicidal ideations, I think, Joanne, you can come in here. From what you've seen, what role does social media have to play in our mental health and suicidal thoughts and ideations? Joanne, and then Marianne, because nowadays a lot of information goes up online, and I think even at some point we'd hear, I saw reports about teenagers being taken on step-by-step processes on, I think it's Discord or TikTok, on how to kill themselves, and some actually proceeded with it. So what role does social media have to play in preventing and also promoting such ideations?
Thank you, Linda. I think from what Engineer has mentioned, that it's mostly the peer pressure and so on. So I'll begin by talking about social media as a whole. That for most people, they believe that social media does increase this ideation. However, I think social media is a means to that end, but not necessarily the origin. From what we've talked about with the other panelists before, is that there are several other factors. And when you take someone who has these other issues, whether physical, biological, in terms of experience, how they view their world, social media becomes like a platform. Whereas when you're parenting your child, or when we were being parented, or when you have been parented, your parents probably told you things like stranger danger, don't accept things from strangers, don't talk to strangers, and so on. Social media becomes a platform where the parent does not know how the platform works, so it can't really guide you on how to navigate that world. So we have social media as a platform or a world where anything goes. There's so much information, like Linda, you've also mentioned that there's a step-by-step guide how to kill yourself, and people do it. And there have been also other challenges of how to kill yourself, like the Blue Whale Challenge was popular a few years ago. And I think social media becomes a catalyst towards somebody actually committing suicide, because there's so much pressures online to look a certain way, talk a certain way. And it's also very easy for someone to leverage social media friends or social media support to go and attack someone else. And if someone is maybe posting something or wants to do a cry of help, which is, again, usually not as clear, because that's what suicide is. It doesn't look the same for everyone. Well, there are those signs, and it's true that on your last day, someone just is a normal day, then somebody kills themselves, and you're like, but they were fine. We talked to them, etc. With social media, it creates this avenue, which is both good and has its challenges in terms of globalization, where many people who are similar can find themselves. And many people who probably thought outside social media, they feel very weird, they feel unaccepted. When you get on social media, everyone is there. There's so many different people, groups of people you can find. And it's therefore easy for people to create communities to support in terms when you look at the good side. But on the other hand, you meet people who are also having suicidal thoughts, and they're sharing ideas, they're agreeing on each other's opinions, and there is no control of how someone will stumble upon the information. Because again, if somebody tells you, oh yeah, there's this group about this and that, that's how you join it outside social media. But once you're in there, you can't really filter the kind of information that comes out. But I do think we can use social media to spread awareness and information. And we've had these dialogues where someone can tell you, if you're being cyberbullied, just switch off your computer. But the thing is, we presently attach our personalities and who we are and our worldviews from the content we get online. And cyberbullying is not fixed to just the cyberspace or the online space. Some will become sleuths, they'll find out where you live. Because again, we also share such information of the places we go to, our friends, which local areas we live in. So it's very easy for somebody who's already predisposed, I put that in quotes, predisposed to suicidal ideation to commit suicide. Additionally, how people perceive suicide online in terms of comments, like for example, with the Eric Omondi's video, how conversations are had, whether they're out of touch, whether they're on either extremes, also sets the precedent for someone who's consuming this information. It sends a message that, yeah, people don't care if you kill yourself. If anything, many people are like, let me even come and help you. And we've had such cases abroad and across the world, really, where people do watch parties of people killing themselves. Absolutely disturbing how it became normal and acceptable. I think it also goes to that aspect where you think everything is a joke when you're online until it's not, until something happens and you're like, okay. And it's so easy for each one of us to participate. Either you are encouraging someone to kill themselves, or you are passively just there. It really takes into account that we are really dehumanizing people in general and how we interact on the one-to-one, that it's so easy to hide behind the keyboard. So I think with social media, it's a cesspool for really weird things to be happening. And we need to take a stand and really advocate for being very sensitive to what you're posting, what you're writing, but also rebuking others. But then that also opens up this space of they will come for you next.
Okay, maybe.
All right. Thank you very much, John, for those thoughts. Sichach, go ahead.
Okay, so maybe if I may add, there's something that Joanne has mentioned on how weird some social media spaces are. And I think we need to be very cognizant of the echo chambers we live in. So as I said earlier, so we may be here speaking about how we can turn mental health we can turn the discussion on mental health positive. But there is another chamber where this person is exposed to only negatives on mental health, and it accelerates the bad mental health on their part. And I think when we talk, I think, I'm sorry for repeating myself because I not need the words properly, but we should find a way to bridge the gap between the echo chambers. We should try to listen to people who don't speak the same as us or who don't share the same ideas as us. That way, we are able to mix the echo chambers. We are able to mix the points of view so that someone who is being led down a rabbit hole that will lead self-destruction can hear something positive, can hear a right direction, can hear people who have actually dealt with mental health problems and are still surviving through it, because a lot of mental health problems don't just go away. It takes time. So if someone is exposed, it depends on what social media you're exposed to. And I think, I don't know if there's someone who is from a gaming ecosystem. So people from the gaming ecosystem actually care a lot to communicate to a younger generation compared to any other person here, I believe. I think that's it. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much, Sichach, for that thought-provoking contribution. At this point, I'd like to invite Paul Kasaya. Paul Kasaya, if you can hear me, go ahead. Paul? Okay, it seems like, wait, can you hear me? Am I the problem? Can you hear me, guys? Anyone? Raise your hand if you can hear me. Linda?
We can hear you. We can hear you, Tracy.
All
Maybe
right, so
as we wait for Paul, Marianne and Faith, from an expert point of view, what would be your comment on the role of social media to aggravate suicidal thoughts or even prevent them? What can be done? What damage has been done? And what's the possible way forward, maybe?
Thank you for that. I agree with most of Joan's sentiments that the internet, and especially what you consume, it can be at either end of the spectrum. So social media is a tool, a very powerful tool to either create or, destroy, because depending on the communities you're engaging with, the people you talk to, the kind of setup you're in, it will obviously affect the kind of information you're consuming. Because I believe to a degree, everyone just wants to have a sense of community, to be or feel like they're part of something. And usually this is what pulls us or propels us to want to engage with other people because you want to feel, seen, you want to feel heard, you want to feel like you're part of something. To a degree, everyone has this, desire to be part of something, to belong somewhere. And sometimes it's sad because when someone maybe just has, that it is just, innocent, this innocent desire to, just fit in somewhere. But then the community I end up in might be fueling something else completely different, a totally different agenda from what, they actually intended to consume. And you find that sometimes you get on social media wanting to do one thing, but then you easily and very fast go down a rabbit hole and you find yourself on some different place you had no idea probably even existed. So you find that it's the difference between you consuming something healthy and something completely detrimental is basically just one click away. You just click on one story or on one, idea, and you might find yourself, catapulted into something totally unexpected. So the social media is a tool, either positive or negative, and there's no denying it. It's really important, and it plays a big part, whether we want to admit that or not. And the sad thing is that sometimes you find yourself in a place where you thought you'd be getting maybe the positive, feedback or positive, whatever it is you went looking for, but then the same thing ends up, turning into something completely different. And I think you can't find anything online. You can literally just search anything heinous you can probably think of, and it will pop up. It's crazy how much is online for people to, get in contact with. And I think it's also important to try and filter what you consume. I know it's not easy. It's easier said than done, but an important thing to consider is maybe filtering what we want to consume. But then again, you find that as someone had mentioned, sometimes it's literally a cry for help. It's, I don't want to do this, but how I'm feeling, where I am right now, I'm at my wit's end, and I'm trying to reach out to someone. I'm trying to tell you, help me. But maybe the way I phrase it, or how it comes out, is completely different from what I intended. And you find that the person on the receiving end, you find a lot of, quote unquote keyboard warriors, people who are so, blatant behind their keyboards, and they can, behind the screens, because you're not seeing this person. You do not know this person. You don't know what they're thinking. You don't know what kind of person they are. And you find that in your attempt to want to reach out and be accepted, or to, to be understood, or to feel like you're being heard, you actually, hit a hornet's nest or something, and you get such negative feedback that instead of actually getting the help you need, it, escalates the matter. And you find that with comments, like the Eric Omondi video, I believe we were supposed to talk about, that he was trying to make a statement, I believe. I can't speak on his, mental state or what he intended with the statement he was making, but he was trying to make a statement all the same. And you find that the comments that follow that video, positive or negative, might, push someone to act, because we understand that our mental state is affected by, the thoughts we have, the feelings we get. An event might happen, and the first thing you think about it, your immediate or your initial thought process will affect how you feel about that event, and this will in turn affect what you do in response to this event. So you find that the comments, the feedback, the backlash, all this can actually, push someone to take an action they had probably not initially not thought about, but the weight, or the ideas behind this might push them towards that. So you might find someone went online with clearly pure intentions, but maybe the feedback they get, pushes them towards a totally different direction. And it's always important to remember that not everything you see is what it is. A lot goes into, what people say, what people do, and sometimes it's hard reading in between the lines. So social media is kind of a, a whole rabbit hole, a whole I don't know, Pandora's box. We can't even mention that in one statement and finish this conversation. So it's, but it's a good thing to begin this conversation. But I believe that social media plays a really, really big role. It's a tool. It can be used positively, negatively. I personally feel like social media connects us in one way or another. And you find that for someone who maybe is really isolated, you can't find people who understand you. You can get on social media and in like one click, you get someone else narrating their story and you connect to it so much. You're like, where have you been all my life? You understand me completely, and this could be a positive thing because you get to learn, maybe it's someone who's been through what you've also been through, and they talk about maybe, how they got over something or how an event happened and how they, healed from it, or it could be a learning experience for you. It could be, the one thing that actually changes your life for the better. Or sadly, it could, escalate to something completely different. As I think John has mentioned, there are even watch parties. People watch each other, commit suicide. It's it's a whole. Social media is, it's a lot. So it has a really big impact, and I believe it just depends on, what is the information out there? How are we consuming it? Are we filtering it? What is, open for everyone to see? How are people accessing these things? Sometimes you might, a person might have, access to things you didn't even know existed, but things are there. So I believe it's a really huge tool if you can use it positively. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for that contribution. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but to wind up this interesting conversation, I'd like to pose a question to all the members of the panel. So criminalization and stigma has led to underreporting and misreporting. So the numbers we have could even be higher. The situation could be worse than we think. So how has criminalization affected our perception towards the topic? I'd like to start with Sichach, if you can hear me.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can go ahead.
Okay. So I think when we talk about criminalization and underreporting, yeah, and I think this is something that we should be very careful about, because I think also it comes back to who we are as a society, or what cultural structures we are referring to when dealing with people who are suffering from bad mental health. And I think it's a very wrong thing that in Kenya we still have a criminalization of suicide in Penal Code 226, because automatically when someone is suicidal, they fear when they speak about it, or they even speak to someone about it, it may worsen the situation rather than better the situation. So I say I'm suicidal, or let's look at what Eric Omondi was doing today. I don't know if it's antics, but anyway, I don't know. Maybe he can tell us himself later, but I think he picked a very wrong tool for what he was communicating, because there are people who are actually suffering from bad mental health who are crying out in a social media space. But when it comes to real life, they have nowhere to go. I think social media gives us a level of invisibility that allows everyone to speak about issues that are really affecting them. And but that is because in the real world, the upper hivi kwa ground, the real world where we are, we don't have social communities that can deal with this. We don't have help centers. For example, in Kenya we have VCTs, right? In every community you'll find a VCT. Why don't we do this for mental health? Why don't we have mental health clinics around us. Yeah, that is a better solution than actually putting a law saying it's illegal to commit suicide. I think it's an ostrich burying their head in the sand. Yeah? It doesn't make the world disappear. It doesn't make mental health issues disappear. It just makes the consequences worse. It aggravates consequences. And I think as Kenyans, we need to start being honest with what we are as a society, with the issues we are facing. I think that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you very much, Sichach. Wairemo Harriet. As we wait for Wairemo, Miriam, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Criminalizing suicide, in all honesty, does not, make a difference. Does not make anyone get better. It, I think people, maybe the law at first, maybe, I don't know what was the precedent to, coming up with this law that, if you attempt suicide, we arrest you and we charge you. Maybe they thought if, they threatened people, they'd stop trying to commit suicide. But in all honesty, it does not, criminalizing suicide does not stop anyone from, not having the suicidal ideation. It does not make things stop. And I agree with Sichach, it's not making anything better. If anything, it's just, it delays a person from getting the help they need, because now they'll not be open to saying that I have a problem. They'll not be open to mentioning what they're going through. They'll not be open to seeking help because they're thinking, okay, if I mention I'm suicidal, what mtanishika sasa? So there's no good coming out of criminalizing suicide. It does not help someone get out of the suicidal ideation. It does not help. It does not stop someone from planning. It does not stop someone from actually committing or dying by suicide. It does not help anyone. If anything, it just makes matters worse, because okay, someone attempts suicide and they survive, then they are arrested and they're taken to jail. You've not solved the issue. You've not made their mental health better. You've not helped them. You've not given them the help they need. You've not given them therapy. They're still probably depressed. They're still maybe, they're still going through the same hardship they were going through before. And if they're released, there could be a reoccurrence. They might try again, because you're not solving the underlying issue. As I've mentioned, suicide is not a one-off thing. It's not a symptom on its own. It's the end product, if I can say it like that, for lack of a better term. It is the end product of suffering or having a mental health issue for such a long time. It's caused by emotional difficulties that have festered for a while, to a point that someone feels, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what to do. And at that point, they don't see any other way apart from ending their lives, because they are suffering to a point that they don't see a way out. The only way out for them in that moment is to end their life. And no amount of threatening, no amount of telling them will take you to jail will change that. What changes that is if they get the actual help they need, if they get the therapy, if they get, the social support, if they get the help that they actually require. So criminalizing suicide does not help anyone. It does not lower the amount of the number of attempted suicide. It does not lower the number of completed suicides. All it does is just it delays, and it puts a barrier between the person who's suffering and the help they need, because now they will not be open to seeking the help that they need. So yeah, if there's one thing that should be done, is the decriminalization, because if someone is found to have attempted, the first point of action, the first line intervention would be what was going on. They get the therapy they need. It resolves the problem they had, and that is how you reduce the number of suicide attempts. That is how you reduce the number of suicides, not by putting someone behind bars, because the depression won't go away. The anxiety won't go away. the PTSD will not go away by putting them behind bars. If anything, it will make it worse. And who says behind bars they won't try to do it again? Because you're not tackling the underlying issue. The issue with suicide is always finding out what is, the cause, what are the factors that pushed someone towards this. It's not putting them behind bars. So that is my sentiment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. So at this point, I'd like to invite Joanne as well to give her final thoughts. Joanne, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. I agree with what Miriam has said. And the thing with suicide is, and especially the criminalizing it, is it truly doesn't help. And I will link that to religion as well and its view on committing suicide. I am a practicing Catholic presently. And one thing the Catholic Church used to do previously is they would not conduct funeral services for people who have committed suicide. However, they have lifted this prohibition. It was lifted in the 1980s, although there are still people who practice Catholicism and really feel uncomfortable when it comes to performing rites or even allowing their loved ones to have those rites performed because of the religious implication of do not commit murder, because it applies also to suicide. And I think what all these prohibitions bring about is it creates room for even more creative ways for people to kill themselves. Suicide is a word that is used as a blanket for people who want to kill themselves. But what we need to understand as well is people want to die at that stage. And as Marianne has put it really well, it is the end. Like many things have happened for many years. This has been something that's festering. And I'd like to bring a new idea in conclusion, and maybe it can open the room for future discussions, that committing suicide or killing yourself isn't just that. It can also include deliberately putting yourself in situations where you know you will die. And I don't think that conversation is had a lot. And with my experience with having depression and listening to content online about other people who have depression, and there's this conversation that, I do not either don't want to exist, because that's now another alternative some people have when they really feel like they just don't want to exist. That's not dying. It's I want to cease existing, because we are aware of how many mental health activists will say it will hurt your parents, your friends will be very sad. So the other alternative is like, I just want to not exist. The world, life really in general, to move on, and me not being there, and my existence not being a hindrance to somebody else's existence. And even in the issues of people putting themselves at risk so that they die, whether that's engaging in risky behavior, whether it's drug abuse, heavy drug abuse, or just walking alone at night, welcoming death, driving without a seatbelt. And it really comes down to mental health. And instead of, and I know the government, the Ministry of Health has put in place a plan to help with the issue. It's called a Suicide Prevention Strategy, 2021 to 2026. And from a development perspective, it's heavily Western-based, and it fails to address some of the social issues that the Global South deals with. But away from that, when it comes to mental health, we need to understand that sometimes we may be having those platforms of therapy, talking to people. Sometimes those people can misuse our trust and our vulnerability, and that can push people over the edge. And I for what worked for me, because I have had my mental health be used deliberately to want to harm me. And had I not received the therapy I had at that time, had I not also made the personal decision to choose me and also not hold others' choices as my own, or that I have a role to play in them, I would have committed suicide. We wouldn't be having this conversation. And that character development, as well as other character developments we will go through, it's really important for us to in our mental health to choose ourselves. Even when other people let us down, there's always hope to, you let me down, that was a you problem, you chose that. I choose to love myself, as cliche as that sounds, to love yourself enough to want to fight for yourself, to keep fighting, to change your perspective, and to find better foundations of your identity as a person, because mental health is not just external, internal, it's a combination of all those things. And it's really important for us to really be individual as well in our mental health and set the necessary boundaries we need to set and use the necessary tools at our disposal, especially the free ones that we have online and also in person, and to put in the work to really work through our challenges. And as people in positions of power, to put in the necessary projects and policies in place, and even for us to be activists and lobbyists in that degree to push for change, because suicide is a horrible thing. It affects way more people than you think, and it has deeply affected the person who commits suicide way longer than anyone has been aware of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne, for your input. And thank you to everyone else who joined this space as a listener or as a speaker. You are appreciated. To bring this conversation to an end, but it doesn't necessarily end here. We can still keep the conversation going on our various social media platforms. But I'd end this by saying emotions should be expressed and processed and not suppressed. And a smile can hide so much. So please check up on your people. Thank you. I've been your host, Tessie Bonareri. I'll pass the mic to Linda to end the session.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you, Joanne, Sichach, Marianne, Wairimo, and all the speakers, some who have dropped off. I think I'll also end with one of the comments by one of the listeners who said, Kyla, who said, people die by suicide, they don't commit suicide. It's not like committing robbery with violence. So I also agree with a lot of sentiments on how it's harmful to criminalize suicide. They are victims, they're not like perpetrators. It's a cry for help. So thank you so much. Let's keep the conversations going on, as Tracy has mentioned. Yeah, until the next, after 2 Thursdays, we'll have the next Twitter space. So thanks and good night all. Bye.